So we've done taste and we've done smell, and now I'd like to move on to sound. And the first one I want to talk about is the sound of people talking in the front of the car when I'm asleep in the back. So I'm assuming that happens a lot because you don't drive.
It's a slightly nostalgic thing, because I guess when you're a kid, you would sleep a lot in the back of a car. So I slightly associate it with that thing when you're a kid and your parents are at a party and you've sort of maybe gone upstairs and done the first bit of falling asleep up there, and then your dad takes you out in a sleeping bag and you have to say goodbye to people, and then you've sort of been taken through the hallway and out the door and then into the cold, along the front garden, along the path, and then bundled into the back of the car. Like it is a little bit part of all that, and that's sort of a fond memory. And I did see it, or somebody had one that was being upstairs, hearing people talking downstairs.
That's it. Yeah.
It's a little bit like that. And that's a real thing as well. When you're staying at someone else's house, your parents' friend's house, and you can hear the sort of mumbling kind of sounds from downstairs. That's kind of nice. But the reason why this one stayed with me is that there's a particular quality that the sound takes on. I mean, it obviously doesn't. It's obviously just a kind of psychological thing. But when you've got your eyes closed and parents are talking in the front, and I don't know whether it is sort of something to do with the particular acoustics that change because you're hearing the sound a little differently when you're not looking at them, or you're not engaged in a conversation that you now know it's nothing to do with you. But it just seems to take on a particular sort of quality. And I've tried it as an adult quite a lot. If I found myself in the back of a car, sort of, perhaps dozing off to sleep a bit, to see whether it still kind of works as an adult. And it does. And it's a really hard thing to sort of put your finger on what it is, but there's something very cozy about it, I guess, because it has this nostalgic element to it, although it's not overtly nostalgic. It's not like the smell of sawdust or something that takes me back to an earlier memory. Not really. It's not that specific, but it probably is a little bit caught up in a general sense of nostalgia. But I mean, am I alone here? Do you get this at all, or not? Not really.
No, I mean, I think I was always like too active in a car, so I don't think I've ever slept in the car. I've always been like wanting to see, look out the windows. I was that kind of kid, and so I've not really, and also not drinking means I'm always the designated driver, so I never get the
very rarely sleep when you're driving.
Yeah, it's end of a party. Oh, I just want to go home. Oh, could you take my friend to Bordeaux? Yeah, sure, no problem. I'll drop them off. Yeah. And that happens a lot.
It probably also is a little bit up there with watching the TV and falling asleep, but when the TV's still going, which again, it just gives it a particular quality that's different when you're supposed to be paying attention to it.
That is interesting, because that is how I can't sleep. Like last night I had a rough night, so I look like crap this morning. But I always do. It's really bad. But I had I listened to Radio 5 Live, like really quiet, or CNN, because weirdly I like the American accent to drop off to. So I put it on a timer and then just like have it quiet. So not quite loud enough that I can hear what they're saying, but not too, just as a reassuring. Yeah, there is a reassuring thing about it.
Yeah, there's a sort of a soporific thing, isn't it? And it's something, I think it's something, obviously there are certain voices, and sort of like podcasts are very popular for that, aren't they? People that put podcasts on. It's just, but it's I think something is to do with the fact that you don't have to engage with it. It's the fact that there's a conversation going on, whether it's maybe on screen or whether it's your parents in the front of the car or friends or whatever, that it's going on without you. And I think it's something to do with that. There's something about having your eyes closed, that you've totally now, you've separated yourself from that. You are, like, anyone looking at you would think you're asleep. So there is nothing you have to do. You've totally opted out. And I think it's a bit like maybe drifting off to sleep while the TV is playing. You don't have to engage with it anymore. You're not supposed to. You're going to fall asleep. And yeah, I wish maybe there's been some studies on it. Maybe it really is a thing that has a name, or maybe it's just a little psychological shift. But it's there's something kind of
people will be now
lovely.
The experts will be now contacting you to say, Derren, is this a thing? Do you know about this? And you'll be like, I do. Yes.
I think if anybody just tries it and goes, I don't know, it's just the same, then it's not going to work. It doesn't come about like that. I think it just comes from the experience of doing it a few times, and it's a gentle thing that settles in.
And as a kind of contrast to this, we go from people to nature. You've very specifically chosen the wood pigeon.
Yeah. So the obvious question is, what is a wood pigeon sound? The wood pigeon sound, the wood pigeon is the one that goes sort of and it repeats. Now, I used to hear this all the time. Again, it's a very nostalgic one for me. I used to hear it all the time outside my window in my bedroom when I used to live in Purley, where I grew up when I was a kid. And it was generally quite a leafy, sort of green area. So I used to hear this all the time. And then didn't hear it forever. Went to university, lived in London, all that. Didn't hear it. And then moved to the country. And then suddenly I hear, and it's also like a really specific little tune. And it's, so first of all, there's just a big nostalgic weight to it. I was like, oh my gosh. And it brought with it all the sort of, just the general mood that comes with living in it's Purley, obviously, it's still, it's a very sort of suburban area. It's not by no stretch is it countryside, but it made me really sort of like appreciate the sort of whole thing of being back amongst nature as a completely, kind of a new experience after living in East London. And I'm now listening to birdsong like a lot more. And there's I was talking to somebody who has worked with blind people, like as in completely blind people, getting their sight back. And he said there is this common thing of rather as we might imagine as people that take sight absolutely for granted, that you'd be sort of like, wow, that's that's what a cup looks like, and there's there'd be a sort of excitement about objects. But what happens is, very commonly, is that you're not really discerning one object from another at all. There's just this sort of wodge of muddy information, which is really hard for us to understand what that is until you think of things like birdsong. Like it really struck me. So there's loads of birds around here, and it's just the sound of birdsong until, because there's one that does Top Gun, and it does like so I kept hearing that. I was like, what is that? So I went on an app. There's like a Shazam for birds, which is great. And it went, oh, that's a blackbird. And I tweeted it, which struck me as funny. But anyway, I tweeted it. So does anybody know what bird might do this? A lot of people said, oh, it sounds like it might be a blackbird. I think it's a blackbird picking something up rather than necessarily a blackbird's call. But of course, what then happened is the moment I'm then picking out a blackbird, and I listened to a few other birds on this app, and I go, that's a wren. And so now what I'm hearing is, I'm not great at identifying them yet, but I'm now hearing different sounds. Like I'm hearing different birds. The odd thing I can half identify, but I'm not hearing a wodge of just bird song anymore. I'm hearing different sounds. And I guess it's the same thing or a similar thing. It's a bit like listening to music out of a cheap speaker when you just sort of get a wodge of sound versus like a really sort of high end thing where you can sort of place all the different instruments and things. Yeah. It's just like a different thing. That was a really long way. That was a lot of irrelevant information, but yeah, the wood pigeon is the one. It does take me back to that. But yes, it struck me to include it because generally the experience of birdsong has become interesting, and not just because there are more birds around, but also that thing of just discerning and whatever discerning and differentiating, and not just. It's discerning nuance, isn't it? Which generally, like in life, is a good thing to be doing. And having that experience of something that's just has only ever been like a wodge starting to sort of split up and become a nuanced and subtle thing, I think is nice and important. So that's why the wood pigeon. But basically, yeah, it takes me back to specific memories.
That's very sweet. And finally, the last category is certain melancholy music. And you've given a list, but I'll let you go through some of those. What specifically?
Well, I did a thing called Private Passions, which is it's like a sort of desert island disc for classical music. And I went through my list, and he said, "Oh, you clearly like private music." And I hadn't really thought that before. And he said, music that, needs to sort of be unlocked and speaks very personally, as opposed to kind of, fun music or sort of I don't know what those things would be, but and it's true. Like the music I listen to is generally solo piano, solo cello, solo violin, whatever, and it's a lot of Bach, and in the more sort of like poppy end of things, I love Rufus Wainwright, I love Leonard Cohen, the more accessible end of Tom Waits, if that's right to say. I like music that needs sort of unlocking and sort of speaks at a very personal place. So that's just been a thing in my life, I think, for as long as probably long as I started listening to classical music. I was in with a classical music gang at school, which was not the right gang to be in with, especially when you don't like classical music, which I didn't at the time. They were known as the Puff Gang, less charitably, by the rest of the school. So that was my crowd. We all hated each other because like you could not make any friends outside of that group at all for however many years you're in the school for. So it was kind of miserable. But my actual love of classical music came much later. So that was a shame. But yeah, so sort of since then, really, since school. So yeah, on the list I put the Goldberg Variations, Bach, his cello suites, Chopin's Nocturnes, Leonard Cohen. Oh, the Dream of Gerontius. That's different. Now that's a big, operatic kind of. Well, it's an oratorio, but it has that big sound. But I love that. I quite like, which is sort of in a way the opposite of Bach, but quite big. So Richard Strauss as well, like big, like yearning music, straining music. I love that as well, and I really do like the Dream of Gerontius. So that's not quite, but it still has it does have that kind of personal thing. It still gets there, even though it's doing it for a much bigger kind of soundscape. It's a wonderful thing, actually. Have you ever been to a performance of it, or have you just listened to it?
No, never. No, it's like I only went to my first ballet about 3 years ago, and I've been to one opera, so the high art sort of side of things is just past me. But I'm a
despite your phenomenal library.
Well,
yeah, you'd think.
Yeah. I've got. I mean, this is all Harry Potter, so it's just variations on that really, and that's and that's 50 Shades of Grey. So that kind of work. That's what I go for really. But so of those three that Derren has just gone through, you've got your melancholic music, the wood pigeon, and the sound of people talking in the front of the car while I'm asleep in the back. Not me, but Derren, while Derren's asleep in the back of the car. One of those is Derren's favourite, and we will find out after you have chosen that.